Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and international football, all from the perspective of a couple of Americans. This week, Arsenal traveled to Prague to face Slavia Praha in the Champions League, and then headed Wearside to battle Sunderland in the Premier League. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Dove. Are you enjoying all the fun new things to say about the River Wear and Prague? And my favorite still, honestly, is the Stadium of Light, which on the one hand sounds kind of pretentious. On the other hand, I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's a nice name. I'll take anything that isn't the name of a company. I greatly prefer that. And it seems like we better get used to talking about the Weir and the Stadium of Light, because it seems very unlikely at this point in the season that Sunderland is going to end up relegated. I mean, it seems like they're around for another year.
Oh, at this point, I think they might have already been able to say
clinching a top 18 spot or top 17.
Not officially clinching, but just in terms of like the numbers it's taken for survival in the past. Like they're way ahead of the pace. Like they have so like they at this point they would have to like completely collapse in a manner almost never before seen in the league to not stay up. They've been I guess there's part of me that thought they would stay up when we talked at the beginning of the season. I think we pegged Burnley right as the one of the most likely to go down.
I picked all three just from recent history that seemed likely to me, and not really knowing Sunderland. But you have some history. They've been in the Premier League before, as long as you've been following the Premier League. So
yeah, it has been a while for them, but they are back and they mean business. So good for them. And we were on the receiving end of this, but hey, better than Chelsea, who actually lost that game. So
yeah. So today was an important reverse fixture in my son's youth soccer season, where there's two neighboring towns where for our baseball teams, the two towns actually don't have enough baseball players in each town to have their own separate little league. We've now officially merged charters and become one consolidated league. But for soccer, there's enough interest in both that they have their own separate teams. And so we had our Northern Duchess Derby reverse fixture today. And it was a chance for me to try something out that I hadn't done before. So I think I probably briefly mentioned on the show a while back that I'm not actually, through administrative goofs, not coaching or assistant coaching his team formally. I've done a few keeper clinic training sessions with him and a few other kids who have shown up to those. So I think of myself as his keeper coach, but I don't really have much of an official capacity. And I started reframing it in my mind last week as like, you know what? I'm his coach. I get to devote all of my attention to him and helping him improve without being distracted by all these other kids. Let the regular coaches take care of them, right? So in that vein, what I did today for the first time is I set up a tripod with my iPhone, and he plays keeper, so it's pretty easy for me to lock it off and just look at his half of the field. It's not ideal. I think ideally I'd be able to position the camera in such a way that I could get the whole field for the whole game, but I locked it off and I got the entire game in two halves. They play 25-minute halves. And so I was able to then sit back with him after a few hours later, after, the match had worn off. We ate dinner, we did some other stuff. We sat back and we watched it together, and I was able to point out, things that he wasn't aware he was doing, and things that he realized watching it from this perspective that he should be doing too, that he came to on his own. So it was a good session. I'm glad I was able to do that and advise anyone who's in a similar non-coaching capacity and willing to work with their keeper children. It'd be harder to do it in other circumstances, because you'd be like manning the camera, panning it back and forth, or if you could get it like in a central position at a wide enough angle or behind one of the goals, which was a little iffy to me. I didn't want to risk like a hard hit shot, like knocking my phone over in the middle of the match. But it was a good experience, and I think we only have one more game left. I'll try it again and see if I can improve it for next time, but it was good.
That's a pretty rapid descent into becoming one of those sports parents. As long as you don't take it out on the referees, that's
no. And I've been very, very conscientious of how I talk about things with his coach. realizing I have no real leverage in the situation, is occasionally offering thoughts and totally okay, and always making sure when I tell Reed anything to do differently, I've always been totally upfront. If your coach says otherwise, what he says goes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't listen to me instead of him. I'm trying to help you in addition to whatever he's saying. But yeah.
I mean, it's such a marked contrast even from when I played, now I say that like this was a real competitive level, but even in the rec league, when the coaches were all volunteer dads, but in an age where the sport was a little less widely known. And so random other parent who was offering advice that usually followed the, hey, why aren't you my assistant? Get down here. You sound like you know what you're talking about. Maybe you let's no, seriously, come on and help.
Yeah, and it's funny talking about the other parents. I did hear one parent, and I'm sure it was a mistake. I'm sure they actually know better, but especially because their child is a younger sibling, and the older sibling also plays soccer and has been for a while too. But she called out to after one of our team's goals. She's like, "Good job, nice touchdown." I didn't say anything. I didn't want to correct her, but.
You never know. Yeah, you never know. Well, this was a parent who said that?
It was a parent, one of the parents on our team, yeah.
I was going to say with the kids, you never know when they're being ironic.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a goof. And like I said, I'm sure she knows better, but it was still kind of funny. By way of follow-up, we talked briefly about the commentary team last week during, I don't remember which match it was anymore. I think it was the second one of the week, which as I scroll through was Burnley. I think it was the Burnley match.
Yeah.
And I couldn't identify the accent, and it was apparently Chris Iwelumo, who is Scottish. And has a Nigerian parent, and who knows, maybe that factored into me not entirely identifying Scottish accent, which I feel bad about, because that is an accent of all the various British accents that we might come across. I mean, I've heard a variety of Scottish accents, and I know they're not all Groundskeeper Willie.
Yeah, I was about to say, just remember that your point of reference for Scottish accents is Groundskeeper Willie and Sean Connery, who's really not doing a Scottish accent. He's doing Sean Connery doing a Scottish accent.
Yeah. Or occasionally not doing a Russian accent, depending on the movie.
Well, yes, it's Sean Connery playing Sean Connery as a Russian submarine captain.
As we continue through the MLS season, we are almost at the end of the first round of the playoffs, right? How are the teams this show follows doing?
Well, so for my case, the only one of these I've actually watched, which, by the way, to help really set the stage on this, by the way, as we record on Sunday evening, it is almost halftime in San Diego for the final game. San Diego, the expansion team, leads Portland 2-0 in the third game of their series. Almost
interesting.
Halftime. Granted, I don't have the internet capacity to watch the game off to the side, and I don't care that much. But I did check the score, so I've got their MLS game tracker, and it's 2-0 in stoppage time of the first half. So presumably the halftime is nigh upon us. They will be. Hold on, let me pull up a bracket here real quick. The winner there will face Minnesota. Vancouver and LAFC will be the other Western Conference semi, and then in the East, I watched New York City on Friday. A 3-1 winner in Charlotte against Charlotte FC. Pair of goals from Nico Fernandez-Mercado, putting the City Boys into the quarterfinals. Will face rival Philadelphia in the one-off conference semifinal. So excited about that. And then the final matchup, Cincinnati beat Columbus in the Hell is Real playoff series. And they will face off against Inter Miami. Who finished off Nashville. Apparently, this is the first time Miami's ever made it this far in the playoffs.
It sounds like it.
For them.
And did so in spectacular fashion in the third match with a 4-0 blowout. Messi scored the first 2 goals of that match. So,
yes, Nashville will have to console themselves with only winning the U.S. Open Cup this year. So,
so with San Diego making it this far, I mean, how often have you seen that in other leagues or even in MLS with expansion teams making it into the playoffs in their inaugural season?
So, well, there's a couple ways to answer that. For much of the history of American expansion teams, they're famously terrible. because of the way the players are allocated to those teams, especially in the existing leagues. For the longest time, it was very difficult. The most infamous of them is the 1962 New York Mets, who are, historically, until 2 years ago, were historically the worst record in the major leagues, in the history of the major leagues. Just famously, not even bad, but famously comically bad, which, when you think about the Mets as, well, it really set the tone right from the start. That's changed a little bit in recent years. The sort of the famous counterexample was that 2018, 2017, 18? The Vegas Golden Knights of the National Hockey League actually wound up in the Stanley Cup Finals in their first year as a team.
Oh, that was their first year? Okay.
Yeah, they lost that one, but then a couple of years later, in 2023, they won the cup. So they've basically been a very good team from the off. MLS expansion teams have been a little bit different, especially of recent vintage. And part of that is just because, of course, they have a much wider pool of players to draw on. A lot of them have been driven by key players that they pick up early on that provide a number of important things for them. I can think recently, Austin and St. Louis both qualifying for the playoffs in their first year. And then very interesting in their second year, taking a major step back. And they'd started strong, kind of one on the edge of some, they had some favorable results that maybe they didn't, quote unquote, deserve according to the game state and play and all that, and wound up near the top of the standings and were subsequently knocked out. They didn't go very deep. San Diego, on the other hand, was right there in the Supporters Shield race and had a pretty good season. They took a step back as the season went along, which I guess isn't terribly surprising, but Portland is probably a bit overmatched for them. We'll see, though. Minnesota is going to be a little bit tougher, and then, of course, waiting for them if they get to the conference finals. Either LAFC or Vancouver, I think, are among the obvious favorites for the titles. So it's still a very strong season for them to start with, but for now, it looks like it is halftime. They're well on their way, so it is a bit. It's not terribly surprising, although I think the general sense of them is they feel more sustainable than the St. Louis and Austin did as the more recent examples. Or LAFC. Well, LAFC wasn't much of a surprise. They spent a ton of money from the beginning and have continued to do that. And big surprise, they're always near the top of the standings.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So we'll continue to follow that. Even, I guess it's going to be mostly on hold until the international break that's coming up is over. But we'll stay tuned to that. Let's talk about Slavia Praha. So this was in Czechia or the Czech Republic, depending on who you ask and when you ask them. But as mentioned before, as far as show trivia, the only European country I have set foot in, aside, I guess, technically from a couple layovers in Paris on the way to and from there, but only the airport. So that was cool. I mean, the first thing that I noticed was the fans were really they kicked it up a notch as far as their coordination and commitment to cheering on their team in novel ways.
We've seen, it does feel like these European games, especially I find as you go to Eastern and Northern Europe, the larger leagues, especially with the bigger stadiums, the atmospheres are, I think, a little more recognizably professional. I'm thinking in the American professional context, there are pockets of good fan or, that kind of coordinated fan activity, but it's really hard to do. And the Emirates seats 60,000. So you just cannot get that same that same level of coordination. And, people will talk about the Camp Nou in Barcelona or the Bernabeu or the San Siro or some of these big ones, but they can do it for moments. Mm-hmm. But for that kind of sustained game, you almost need the smaller stadium because it keeps the fans a little closer together and allows those atmospherics to sort of take over. But yeah, they were a fun fan base. I thought we did pretty well, actually. The traveling Arsenal fans certainly made a bit of noise, but that'll happen when you win 3-0. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, it does. It does definitely help. The earlier thing the fans did was the coordinated signs was kind of funny, but then what really caught my attention, I didn't really even notice that until watching the highlights later, but what I definitely noticed in real time was when toward the end, and I guess this is maybe the Czech equivalent of like rally caps in baseball or something, but like the entire side behind the goal that we were trying to score in all took their shirts off all at once. Well, I guess I'm saying all, either they were all male fans or it was probably only all of the male fans who took their shirts off. But.
So that was all, and if you're looking at the camera angle, would have been on the left-hand side, that behind that goal. They were the ones who had the coordinated card display, which I can't remember what it was. It was very cool. And they held it up for several minutes. Like you could see it as the game was going on, which was kind of wild. My suspicion is that's a lot more related to what they're called the ultras. Those kind of fan bases. There
was a sign that said something about ultras somewhere amongst them. Yeah.
The ultra fans. In some context, the ultras, there's a violent, there's an undercurrent of violence to some of what they do. I don't think that's the case here. I'm not accusing that, but I think that sense of the ultra fans, they are a little more coordinated and probably at this point, I wouldn't say exclusively, but predominantly male in a way that even the other stuff isn't. Other parts of the stadium wouldn't necessarily be. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which team it was. I'm searching through our notes to see if I can possibly find it. But there was one team we played in Europe last year where like all the fans were in. This was a home game for us, and they were all in there in the supporters corner of the Emirates, and they're all wearing black and just like looked very, very serious and somewhat intimidating. But I wish I remembered which team that was. We stomped them, whoever it was. But yeah. So we definitely need to talk about the 2 penalty calls that came up during this match, and I think it'll make sense to talk about them in reverse order. So let's start off with the one that was called against Ben White and then reversed upon VAR review. What did you make of that?
So as you watch that one live, it's easy to see why it was called. 2 guys go up, legs are high, the Slavia player winds up on the ground. Yeah, I can sort of see that. And then to me, it all worked out because they watch the replay and you go, he doesn't touch him. It's just kind of an awkward fall.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we've talked about before with like where the clear and obvious comes into play. We're like, okay, well, if he never made contact, then it's clearly not a penalty. So
exactly, yeah. And in a lot of cases, you see penalties are almost certainly reviewed by VAR. Whether they bring the actual referee over is a different one. But in that case, obviously, they look and see there's no contact, so there's no penalty. Justice was served, as so to speak.
Yeah, they got it right.
Yeah, they got that one right. And, it's funny because of course, that came very late on. The game's already 3-0. The game's kind of over.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels like, I guess I don't know how I would have felt if we had conceded a penalty at that point. Even, is it a chance for Raya to do something? I mean, I don't know.
I know how I felt when I thought it was going to be a penalty. And let me also, when I was introducing this match, what I didn't mention was the circumstances under which I viewed this one. So this happened on Tuesday this past week, which any of our American listeners will remember was Election Day in this country. And for my 4th year running now, I worked the election. So in New York State, we have poll workers who are represented by both parties for every job that there is to do at the poll site. And I've done 2 out of the 3 jobs that you can do there now, and done the training for one, and just hasn't worked out for the last one that I haven't done. But it is a long, crazy day. We have to show up at 5:00 in the morning. Polls open at 6. Polls close at 9, and then by the time we're done tearing everything down and ready to leave, it's like 10 o'clock. So we're talking about a 17-hour day. Waking up basically not long after I would very often be going to sleep on a normal evening. And so by the time I got home, it was very late. And after that was the only time in my schedule to watch the full match replay of this, which I proceeded to attempt to do and could not stay awake, despite my very, very best efforts. And it was just this kind of dreamy, haze-like viewing experience. Like I'd nod off and then hear the crowd go wild, or the commentators like piping up about something to find, oh, a goal was scored, a penalty was called, like certain things like that. I'd like wake up for a second and look at the screen and see what was going on, take notes like I do while I'm watching the matches, and try to watch it, and then just nod back off until the next exciting thing happened. But so
there's a joke in there somewhere about a having only a dreamlike remembrance of my night in Prague, but I've never been to Prague. I hear a lot of cool things, but
yeah, I didn't stay. I was there for a few days, I think. So not any fun stories to tell, but so
not on this show.
Yeah, that'll be the after show. So basically, when I thought that they had conceded a penalty in this kind of, this half awake state, all I was thinking of, oh no, this was going to be like the next clean sheet stringing along in this record. And that's what I was really worried about is, you generally assume that a penalty kick is going to result in a goal most of the time, because it does. And just assuming that was the case, like, oh no, our clean sheet. And yeah, that's a very optimistic way of looking at it. Like, oh, could Raya have like done something amazing? And yeah, maybe he was denied that opportunity, but I'd rather, I'm glad it went the way that it did.
Yeah, at that point, we had kind of already broken it, and I forget what the instance was, but they had picked up a shot on target, so we couldn't claim that
right
record still.
Exactly. Yep, I noticed when that happened. Yep.
Yeah, but it's one of those. It would have been a tough way to sort of give up that shutout streak, and then we didn't, so we didn't have to worry about it. So
right.
That, and we'll finish. We'll finish the day as the one of only two clubs to not have conceded a goal. No, I'm sorry, it's the only club, that have to not have conceded a goal in the Champions League so far in the league phase.
Yeah, so that was good. So let's backtrack a little bit to the beginning of the match. This is in the 32nd or 31st minute, I guess, when there was an attempt on goal that yielded a handball call in our favor for a penalty kick. What exactly happened there? Am I the only one who didn't really see much of a handball? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, but I'm glad it went the way that it did. It worked out well for us. But if I'm being honest, there wasn't much there, was there?
There's not much there, but this gets back to, we've talked about this, we've seen this in practice, right? The difference between the way the handball is refereed in Europe versus the way it's refereed in England. This to me was a European, a Champions League handball, one that you probably don't see called in the Premier League. Having said that, I mean, it's a deflection. I got to be honest, even on the replays, I was having trouble seeing it. It's clearly not much of one, but the Slavia defender's arm is up, and I guess it grazes his hand or his arm.
Yeah, like when you see it, watching it again, I finally, just now, live, as we're recording, kind of actually saw it. And while the ref is looking at the VAR screen, that replay, you see it kind of hits off of his head shoulder area. Yeah, it hits like his fingertips a little bit on the way to the goal. Like, very by the book call. Like, did not draw any advantage from it whatsoever. But yeah.
Right, but we've seen that call given in Europe. We've been on the other end of that before. So it was kind of one of those, and you see a couple of Arsenal players kind of doing the thing with their hands up. But for the most part, it looked like Arsenal was getting set to just take the corner, and all of a sudden they stop and said, oh, wait, no, they're checking for a penalty. And suddenly comes out, points to the spot. So, yeah. And there's Bukayo Saka, to do it. It's a good penalty. It's a great attempt. It's a great attempt from Saka and a great save attempt from the keeper. But just and puts it pretty much the only place the keeper isn't getting to, at basically just inside the post, low and hard. And I think I'd seen something even speculatively like if he gets any elevation on the ball, that probably does. The keeper does get a hand to it, and probably does
a little elevation. Like, definitely along the ground and near the ground. That was the one spot it could have gone in. The other way to go is like the top corner, which it's a it's a riskier.
I mean, that's a lot
more room for error there.
That's essentially what you try to do: is you shoot for the corners. That's one of the good pieces
for any shot. Yeah,
yeah, you shoot for the corners. Because obviously they're the furthest away from the keeper. And in that case, yeah, I mean, going low, bottom corner is, has its benefits. But yeah, I mean, so many of those shots you see, you look at them, they're not like rolling on the ground. They're slightly elevated. And if he hits it that way, yeah, the keeper just might get his hand to it. And all of a sudden it's a big save, maybe a little momentum for them. But he didn't. He did not get his hand to it. And 1-0 to the Arsenal. Another Champions League goal for Saka.
Yeah, definitely. It was done in style. So that I was going to say it opened the floodgates. I guess that isn't totally true because we still ended the half at 0-1, but it was the first amongst a few. So why don't we talk about Merino's goals?
Yeah, and that's Mikel Merino, who scores when he wants. Apparently, he's a really smart player, I think is really the way to think about it. Because, I mean, he is a midfielder. I'm not going to pretend he's like secretly been a forward this whole time, or that this has sort of unlocked something in him that nobody knew he had. He's obviously a very intelligent player, but he's done a really good job in using that in terms of putting himself in positions. And I think in both these goals, what I'm really seeing is a guy who puts himself in positions. We talked about that with Kai Havertz, right? Last season or the season before, we're thinking about, okay, what does Havertz do? We talk about it with Gyökeres, right? With forwards, it's sometimes not even about the goals. Obviously, it's ultimately about the goals, but it's about putting yourself in position where where spaces where the ball can go to, and when it finds you, you're right there to score. And he does it twice. Right. This one was definitely more the positioning thing, where he's right where he needs to be. The ball's just tapped in, and just like that, it's 2-0. And the game's not over at that point, but. If you're Slavia Prague, you take a moment, you've got a good crowd behind you, you've got the second half, let's go, let's turn it around.
Yeah.
And a minute in, gone.
Yeah.
It's just gone.
Yeah, no, it's definitely that kind of tactical thinking where you're thinking a couple steps ahead. Like, okay, I see where he is. I see the people around him and the directions that they're moving in, that this spot is going to open and he can put the ball there. And you practice with your team enough where, you know what's going to happen. And that was so nice the way he jumped in the air and just kind of tapped it in midair with his foot. It was really, really nice finish on that.
It was a really nice finish. A little nicer, a little cleaner, a little more picturesque than probably his second goal, the third Arsenal goal, which feels a little more Carnivalesque, a little more a little yakety sax playing over the top of it. But the keeper comes out to try to play the ball. So it's Rice floats it in. Merino sort of floats into position and just kind of pushes it by him, and the keeper will 100% want that one back. But just like that, it's 3-0, and then the game really is over. There really isn't anything else to. 3-0, it is over.
Yeah, even if that penalty call had gone the other way, like, okay, great, you robbed us of a clean sheet, but the result stays the same. Yeah, so beyond that, I think we've kind of covered most of what we have to say about the Prague match. You want to head over to the River Weir?
All right, to the Weir side we go.
Sunderland, this is my first time seeing them in action, and it's my first time in a few years seeing Granit Xhaka. He looks like
Old
he's doing
friend.
well.
Yeah.
As the one commentator pointed out, he's wearing his age on his jersey. He wore 34 for us, didn't he?
Yes. Yeah,
that's a number that has some meaning to him. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but he's definitely attached to it, and his career's gone pretty well since Arteta showed up at Arsenal. Obviously, we've talked about the rise of Arsenal's rise, helping getting Arsenal back in the Champions League. He moved to Bayer Leverkusen and was part of their invincible team, so he's won a Bundesliga title, and I believe also they won the German Cup. I don't remember what it's called.
I'm sure it's a very long name.
But whatever the equivalent of the FA Cup is in Germany. So he's had success there. He's now since moved back to England to Sunderland, and is definitely a key player in them, sitting in a Champions League spot through 10 games, which has been quite an impressive start. This is one of those games that I think you looked at the start of the season and were thinking, because we talked a lot at the start of the year about how difficult the start of the season was. But you look at some of those games we've gone through already, and maybe, for frankly, the Liverpool game, obviously, the name sets itself. Liverpool's sitting in 7th right now. Pretty sure, and double check that. Yeah, I'm sorry, they're in an 8th. Sorry, Liverpool's in 8th right now. Fulham's down in 15th. But yeah, here's Sunderland currently sitting in 4th, which is, I don't think where anybody saw them, even the most optimistic Sunderland fan. I didn't think he saw that one coming.
No.
And frankly, as good as they've been, and they've been very tough at home. I think they're unbeaten at home at this point. They concede very few goals. They had a very good defensive record in the championship last year. Well, so naturally, this was a 4-goal game, which was kind of interesting. And unfortunately, we talked about not losing the shutout streak against Slavia Prague. We very much did lose the shutout streak up at the Stadium of Light.
Yeah, we did. So the first goal came in the 36th minute. This was the player's last name. I would say it Ballard. It sounds like when we were talking pre-show, you would say it Ballard. It sounds like the commentators were saying Ballard. I don't know if that's the way he says it. I don't know if that's just the way that an Englishman would generally say it. But so he was a former Arsenal Academy kid, apparently. Found his professional career through Sunderland. I was going to say Sutherland. Sunderland. That probably won't be the last time that happens. And yeah, that was a nice shot. I mean, that free kick from the from the keeper that set it up for him was pretty nice.
Yeah, the whole sequence there. I mean, I don't know so I'm thinking back to even the foul that led it when they first whistle it. I didn't hate the yellow card to Zubimendi because live I thought he kind of got his hands around him and kind of pulled him back a little bit in kind of that obvious stopping like a break kind of way. On replay, it doesn't look quite as bad, which was a little frustrating. He's going to pick up a yellow for that.
It does. It's like the arms were around him, but like not aggressively so, if that makes sense. Like his arms are kind of loosely positioned around the guy, where I definitely get why it looked that way, but but it, that's one of those, for all we talk about Arsenal's prowess scoring goals from set pieces, especially from corners, we have shown at points over the last few years, last year in particular, I think was a problem, conceding goals from set pieces, and it's just the long free kick. Ballard there with an authoritative finish. I mean, it's a little bit of a lucky bounce that gets into position, but when you get your chance, like we talked about with Merino before, when you get that chance, you just gotta punch it in, and he does. And that was a class finish. There's really nothing Raya can do about that, I think. Right. Unfortunately, all of a sudden we're a bit stunned because honestly, I thought, well, I know some folks are a little down on the performance overall, and there were moments in the first half where we definitely looked ragged. We did not look particularly strong. But I thought overall we were better than them. They spent a good chunk of the half, like putting a bunch of men behind the ball, occasionally pressuring us higher up the pitch, but for the most part playing very defensively. Yeah. Yeah, and when our first goal for Arsenal came, it was after a nice run of form, like some really nice like one touch and quick passing, resulted in the ball at Saka's feet, and he did a Saka thing and put it in the back of the net.
Yeah, just a really quick turnaround on the turnover. Rice with the tackle. Eze gets it to Merino. What a passer, Merino. He had a pretty good week overall.
Yeah.
Gets the cross into Saka. And Saka's goal, again, much like the penalty, there's only one place for that ball to go. I mean, and really, you look at, he finishes that near post, on the short side of the keeper. That's a really difficult finish. We've seen him a couple times on those balls coming in and kind of roofing them from that angle. This one, he goes low and hard, and the keeper's kind of stuck there. And we came out, like you said, in the second half with a lot of energy, a lot of vigor. I mean, we were really pouring it onto them for a while, and that goal was coming, I think, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you need that. You just need an incredible play from an incredible player, and all of a sudden there it is. It's 1-1, and Arsenal was very much in the ascendancy.
Right.
It kept coming.
Right. Yeah. So the next one came a little bit later. So that was in the 74th minute, and Trossard brought us ahead for what we thought was going to be for a long stretch of this match, the winning goal. It didn't turn out that way. It was funny. After Sunderland scored the first goal, I watched this whole match replay with my son, and he had said that he thinks the score is going to be 2-3 Arsenal. Like that's an interesting prediction for this early in this match with these two teams. And it's like, as the goals got scored, I was like, oh no, oh God. And at a certain point after the fourth goal score, I was like, I hope he's right. Yeah. But that fourth one was so late. But yeah, so this was like the prophecy like fulfilling. Okay, well, yeah, we're going to win by one at least. I thought that much of it was going to be true. But we talked about the corners earlier. The way he placed that in the top corner of the goal was just something.
Yeah, and that one is very much a Trossard only goal. He does a really good job sort of finding himself, not just creating the space for the shot, because we had a lot of times where guys were shooting from distance, or you could tell they were looking, but Sunderland was packing so many guys in. That's one of those. Trossard found the space.
He made the space.
Right. He takes a step to the side. And sometimes if you watch from the behind the goal angle, you can see how some of the defenders are shifting around, like almost like they're not expecting that I don't think they intended to give him the angle on the goal they did, but he steps into that space, and you can see it from behind the goal. He has a clear path to the goal, and he just leathers it into the top. I mean, just absolutely rips it there.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of money on certain players over the last few years. Obviously, Declan Rice and Gyökeres and so many of these other players. Man, we got Trossard cheap. And he has been just a great addition. I mean, how much of, we'll talk about this more in a moment. We start talking about the lineup and the subs and all of that. How much trouble are we in if he's a guy we had sold over the summer? Because his was a name being floated out for a guy to not be here. And how much trouble would we be in if we didn't have him on the left wing?
No, that's true. Yeah, it would be a very different season. Yeah, he's been a major contributor, absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's glad that it worked out that way, and hopefully he stays uninjured. I mean, I know we didn't really plan to talk about it too much, but I don't think anything's really changed so much since we last spoke about it last week. But it looks like we're still on track for a handful of players to come back after the international break. It's looking like, at least from the rumored reports. So
yeah, a handful of names targeting the North London derby 2 weeks from today. So after the international break, hopefully that is coinciding with them not playing with their national teams this break. So hopefully that's the case. But that seems to be what they're targeting is that day to come back. We'll see for sure. But yeah, I think we'll get into this more in just a moment. I think we were starting to run on fumes a little bit. I think you saw that a little bit later in the game. We talk about Sunderland getting the equalizer. That just feels like the more I think about it, it feels kind of like a tired goal to give up. Like, that's not a goal we have conceded this season, right? Partly because we haven't given up that many chances. We do such a great job, really kind of like a boa constrictor, right? Just sort of squeezing the life out of the game once we get that lead. And we just didn't quite have that. And I have to say, I was feeling a little nervous as we got into stoppage time, not because I was worried that they could do it, but the way things were proceeding sort of felt like, ooh, I don't like where this is going. It feels like there might be a goal coming.
And there was so much stoppage time too.
There was
first and second halves. Yeah.
Yeah. It made sense. I wasn't shocked to see it. I think it was Timber was down for a while.
Oh yeah.
It had the cut in his head.
Yeah, there are reasons, but it was a lot for both halves. Yeah,
it was not. I don't feel anything particularly, untoward about the stoppage time that we saw. But it's just, he floats it in. Raya and Gabriel both go for it, and both of them kind of whiff on the ball. And there's Brobby to fire it home. Good finish.
Yeah, it was. It just looks so incredibly clumsy on Raya's and. Who was it? Gabrielle who was there with him? You said, yeah. It just looked clumsy on their part. Like they were just both completely. I mean, they both almost or did actually get kicked in the process too, and trying to get there late. It was. It was a mess.
Yeah, I mean, Sunderland has 2 shots on goal in that whole game. That was it.
Yeah.
I mean, we may be headed for a season. This is a wild stat to think about. We may be headed for a season where David Raya has more clean sheets than saves. Because we've done such a good job, right? Limiting those scoring opportunities. Right. And that's kind of, you can tell this is where Arteta's defensive mindset is, right? It's not about it's not about stopping shots. It's about stopping those opportunities. They don't get shots on goal. You don't give up shots on goal. You don't give up goals. Now, this is a little extreme in the other direction.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to think about. Well, I don't know. Let's talk about the subs or the lack thereof before we get into like sort of the bigger picture stuff. But yeah, I mean, one sub the whole game. Christian Mosquera came on for Eza 88th minute.
That was interesting. I don't remember really ever seeing that. Like, at least not in modern Arsenal history. Like, since I've been watching, I don't remember them ever just bring on one guy. He usually maxes out the subs, like, every game, especially when you're going into, like, a lengthy run of stoppage time. They'll bring in, like, in the 91st minute, they'll bring in, like, some fresh legs, some younger players, depending on the situation. But the interesting thing with Mosquera is he came on for Eze. So that wasn't a like for like. That was shoring up the defense immediately before the goal ended up getting scored.
Oh, yes, that was a defensive decision that was done to shore up the defense. Which, again, it's one of those, if Robbie doesn't get free and we don't concede that goal and we see it out 2-1, everyone sort of says, hey, good defensive performance. But it's interesting. You go down, you look at the bench that we rolled out in that game. I mean, we played really well at the start of the second half. So there's not going to be necessarily a real push to make a lot of changes because we came out the one time you want to come out strong, we really did, and eventually got us the goal. I look at that bench. I mean, the only other move I could have potentially seen is maybe you pull Calafiori for Lewis Skelly, or maybe you pull Declan Rice for Lewis Skelly, or Zubimendi for Lewis Skelly, who can play in the midfield, but is also a little more defensively minded. I mean, Norgard's fine, but, is he really better than he's certainly not better than Rice or maybe Zubimendi.
Well, but there's a difference between when you're comparing starters, like how are each of those players with fresh legs compared to Norgard or Miles Lewis Skelly with fresh legs compared to their counterpart after 90 or at least nearly 90 minutes, which is not a like for like in any case,
right, which is a fair thing to think about. But I start to look at, we had a fair amount of but we didn't have a lot of ball carriers, a lot of offensive players. I mean, Pierre Hincapié, Ben White, I mean, these are guys who wouldn't have been bad choices. But if you're thinking, let's go defensive, okay, yeah, Mosquera is really, is really probably the best option there. But I just look at those players. I mean, to me, Lewis Skelly is the only other one. Maybe Wanyeri. I don't know about that. Andre Anus, Max Dowman. And this was a physical game. It's not one I would have really felt comfortable bringing those guys on, especially Dowman at his age, but even Anus with sort of the relative lack of experience. This was a little tougher than that, and it did feel a bit like. I do think, though, even thinking about those lack of names, I felt like Arteta gambled a little bit that his guys could see it out, but they looked a little tired at the end, and I think that led to some of Sunderland's additional pressure. And then I don't know if that's really fair to say definitely that tying goal, but I can't help but think that it was at least a little bit involved.
Yeah. I mean, it looked to me once we got into and maybe even a little bit near the stoppage time that it was almost like we were just like, well, okay, that's it. We just kind of would coast, which has been fine. If they had done that in almost every match so far of a season, I mean, it would have worked out generally okay. And maybe that's what they were basing it on, is no real threat posed later on for a lot of these competitions. But Sunderland didn't see it that way.
And I don't think it's fair to say even use the term coasting. I mean, that's not at all what they do. They are dogged defenders. I mean, they really, and defense, there's a lot of defense is just simply about effort. Like, you can play pretty well defensively just by really pushing yourself. And we do that. And you could see that, when balls go out for corners or shots get blocked, you can see, Gabriel and Rye out there, high-fiving each other for that. There's there's a shouting and chest bumping for those kind of defensive plays. There's a lot of pride taken in the defensive abilities. I mean, there was the post game quote from Arteta, which he's conceding goals. He says, "It's a pain in my tummy." so weirdly incongruous.
I wonder what that is in Spanish. It may come off differently.
It may be, but this is a team that takes a lot of pride in that, and it's kind of it does leave a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth going into the break. But I do think with the injuries and the thinness of the bench, I think they looked a little knackered here, and I think the international break comes at a good time. Frustrating to concede the goals and drop the points that way. But if you think big picture, again, this is only the third time this season we drop points. We drop them to teams that are sitting in European spots in the standings. Where we drop Liverpool and City, who are the last two champions, and then also now Sunderland, who's sitting fourth in the table. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I thought we played well. I don't want to sit here and say we deserve to win, because, of course, as we know, over the years, deserve's got nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think overall we played really well, and I think we were the better team, and we're going to feel a bit hard done by not only coming away with a point. But again, credit to Sunderland for making plays they needed to and getting the result. It's just a little frustrating, but overall, I still feel pretty good about where we are and how the season's gone. We're still 4 points clear. We've still got 8 wins from 11 games or whatever we're at right now. I can't. I'm not going to get super worked up about this result. And frankly, if the season comes to if it comes to the end of the season and we miss out on the title by a point, there's going to be a lot of things we can point to between now and then. Mm-hmm. It's not as if you can go back to, well, if we hadn't conceded in stoppage time at Sunderland. There are other things we'll probably be able to point to this season that will make the difference there. So, as long as they use the break to sort of reset, refocus mentally, at least from an Arsenal perspective, I think we're going to be fine. And I don't want to I don't want to. It's frustrating, but I'm not overly bothered by it. Now, granted, someone that could just be a little condescension towards Sunderland, who, to be frank, I do not expect to be a title contender for the length of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Much like the way we talked about Forest last year, I don't expect to see Sunderland. Certainly as just even after all that, they're still 7 points behind us. I don't expect to see them challenging us for the title at the end of the season.
No.
And we don't have the same sort of recent history against them as opposed to some of the language I used when we played Newcastle or when we dropped points to Liverpool or to City. There could be a little that kind of quote unquote condescension playing with it as well.
Like they're not worthy of your contempt.
Maybe.
I mean, when it comes to this, how would you characterize this result? I mean, how much of it was luck and how much of it was their skill? I mean, certainly when you talk about 2 goals from the only 2 shots on goal, that definitely does indicate at least some component of luck, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could point to things like the ball bouncing just where Ballard needs it to get the goal. Brobby's being being there when Raya and Gabriel kind of whiff on it and hit each other. But Brobby and Ballard both have to make those finishes, which they do excellently. I mean, the first one was set up by a really good set piece. They put really good set piece sequence. Mm-hmm. The second one was, I think, kind of coming a little bit from the pressure they were putting on us late. So, I mean, you need a little of that. I mean, how many times have we, rued our bad luck in not scoring a goal? Mm-hmm. Luck plays a much greater role than we sometimes want to admit, but you do also want to put yourself in, I forget who it was. Was it Vince Lombardi? But the idea is luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Mm-hmm. That when the ball comes to you in that position, that you're ready for it and you make the play you need to, and they did. And sometimes you just got to tip your cap, and they just made made plays they had to, and they got a result, and good for them. And let's just hope it doesn't. I don't worry about it biting us too much at the end of the season. We are a quarter of the way through. We have a long way to go.
Who is your player of the week?
A couple of choices. I found myself drifting more and more to Declan Rice. I thought he was really good overall. I thought he did a good job in the Slavia game when the result was still in doubt. He had some key plays, including the turnover that leading to our equalizer. I thought he was good overall. I did think his flagging a little bit towards the end of the game, he was starting to look a little tired, which I think was part of their being able to amp the pressure on us a little bit as well. So I'm going to say Rice, who I thought was a good player all around. And, I think we haven't mentioned him a lot in recent weeks in his overall qualities. So I think he deserves a mention not just for this week, but for the last several weeks as well.
What do we call it? A rotational selection?
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely he's been on my mind too. So thank you for taking the opportunity. I mean, for me, ultimately, there are a few names I was bandying about in my head, but I mean, Merino with 3 goal contributions on the week, stepping up when Gyökeres is hurt and filling that role that we needed him to do last season and doing it again and doing it well. I mean, overall, it's hard to argue with those results. So definitely him for me. One thing that we didn't actually get to talk about too much with him was that elbow to the head that he took fairly early on in the Sunderland match. That was pretty nasty.
Yeah, and I've heard some speculation there, and this is all idle, internet chatter, and so people some armchair physicians watching the game, but he did look he wasn't. We've seen better performances from Merino in the game, and part of me wonders. Again, thinking about the assist, the pass he makes to Saka to set up that goal, which was an excellent one. I wonder. It's not hard to wonder if Merino is maybe not 100% in that instance. You hesitate to say concussion because that's obviously you can't judge that from TV. But it did seem like he wasn't quite himself.
Could have potentially been a subconcussive, head injury still that kind of knocks you for a loop a little bit. Yeah.
And again, another guy who maybe he'd take him off, but you kind of think to yourself, who do you put on instead of Merino? Like you really can't come off until we've taken the lead, and even at that point, I guess you throw on another midfielder or a defensive player. But man, I don't. Yeah, that's a tough guy to take off because he does so much work, so much around the field.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, he did come through at times when it mattered. So he's it for me this week. As we sit here right now, we're still top of the table. It feels good. I mean, yeah. Looking at our form, I mean, we're one of only 2 unbeaten teams over the last 5 matches, the other being United, who have drawn their last 2 while we drawed our most recent one. So, even a better record in the last 5 than them. But yeah, it's really shaping up.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently 4 points clear of Manchester City, who beat Liverpool earlier today, which obviously the ideal result in that game was a draw, and that didn't happen. What are you going to do? But we're 4 points clear, so even if, we'll definitely be in first place after the next round of league fixtures as well. And I think, but City has been playing really well as of late. They've started to really put things together. They're obviously going to be driven a lot by Erling Haaland doing Erling Haaland things, by which I mean just scoring a metric ton of goals. They're going to be they look like they're going to be the most likely challenger to linger on. Although we say that, there's Chelsea just behind them at 20 points. I'm still not a believer in Chelsea. I think they're still too inconsistent to ultimately really contend for the title. But they have a lot of talent, and talent can win out for a long time. So we'll see how that plays out.
Is Cole Palmer healthy again yet, or is he still out?
Don't remember. I honestly don't pay a lot of attention to Chelsea when we're not playing them, but right. He may still be out. But I feel they dropped a result to Sunderland. That was 2 weeks ago, I think. So they're a team there's a reason they're 6 points behind us. It's not a huge gap even at this stage of the season, but there's a reason they're sitting there. Whereas City, and of course a lot of it is the recent results in City's case, recent seasons, it plays a little bit of a role in the way we think about them as well. So.
Yeah, real-time follow-up from the Daily Cannon, which sounds like it would be an Arsenal site. I'm not sure, but apparently earlier today they were still saying, Maresca hopeful injured Palmer will be back for Arsenal when we play them. So yeah, he is still injured. So yeah, okay. I mean that can only help them. But yeah.
Yeah, that's that table. We should also touch briefly on the Champions League table right now. We are second in the table. We are now, I should say, the only team in the league phase that has not conceded a goal, as Inter Milan conceded. They won still, so we're in a three-way tie on the top with Bayern Munich and Inter Milan. 4 wins from 4 games. Currently, we're second. We're ahead of Inter Milan, is plus 10 on goal difference. Bayern and Arsenal are both plus 11, but Bayern has 14 goals. We've only scored 11. And so they are currently ahead of us on that score. By the way, quick side note, Manchester City is also unbeaten. They're 3 wins and a draw. There's one other team that actually has not lost a game through 4 matches in the league phase. And this is a bit of a surprise when I saw it. It's Tottenham Hotspur. I did not expect that. They have 2 wins and 2 draws. So a bit behind the rest of us, but still without a 0 in that loss column.
Right.
Although, we talk about the teams who are off to that, one every game start. That is not going to hold the next match day because our next Champions League game is home against Bayern. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely. That's it's again one of those things that sounds like it's scripted, like when things work out that way. But yeah.
We'll talk about this a little bit more next week as we head into it. But coming out of the international break, I mean, it's Spurs in the North London derby, midweek game, Champions League against Bayern Munich, and then away to Chelsea on the weekend. That's a week, man. That is a week.
Well, actually, given that we may end up not recording next weekend, maybe we should talk about that a little bit.
I guess as you point out, the obvious thing to say is, when we come back from the break, it's Sunday. That Sunday, which is the 23rd of November, home against Tottenham. On Wednesday, the 26th, the day before American Thanksgiving, we'll be home against Bayern Munich. And then the 30th of November, the last day of the month, which is, checking my calendar, is a Sunday as well. We'll play. We'll be away to Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. We talked about the difficulty of the start of the season. Honestly, as the end goes, not the end, obviously, but, that week right there looks about as dangerous as or certainly as quality a stretch of opposition as we're going to see potentially at any point this season. I haven't really looked at the 2026 portion of the calendar yet, and maybe a Champions League knockout game between 2 big league games. But man, Spurs, Bayern, Chelsea in order. Whew. Oh boy. It's gonna be fun. Heavy
load. Did I actually, sorry to call an audible on this one, but did I just see yesterday that the Crystal Palace is trying to have our Carabao Cup fixture moved a week later?
Not trying to. That apparently did happen. I guess it's a follow-up from last time. That game will be on the 23rd of December.
Yeah.
So the following week. So I wonder if it'll be a case where they actually, since the previous week is going to be when the other quarterfinals are played, if they'll actually do the semifinal draw, and we'll know who we're going to who the winner of our game will face, whoever makes the semifinals. It'd be interesting. Right. I don't know. We'll probably talk about that closer to December.
Yeah, and that match is going to be 2 days after we play Everton. That's going to be a bit of a tough stretch. Kind of like what we were talking about Crystal Palace was going to be up against. They kind of forced us into a similar situation.
Not as bad as they were looking at. It was going to look it was looking really bad for them, but still not ideal. But hopefully we get a few guys back, and when we're talking about we get a few guys back, and our depth is able to come into play there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, thanks for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can also listen to the podcast version of our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. And before you do that, your homework for today is for just those podcast listeners out there to please rate and review our show wherever you listen to us. That helps new listeners to find the show, and we really appreciate it. We record the show using Zencaster. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talked about and our socials. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
2 quick notes before we go. First, 80th minute, San Diego 4, Portland 0. Feels like that one might be over. That's live, everyone. And second update, I just want to wish everyone a safe and happy final interlull of 2025.
And to all a good night.